Okay. We are up to part 3 of making a Seder out of the Seder. And what the plan for today is to finish till the end of the Haggadah of Magid up to Motzi Matzah. And then I have on my notes a whole list of things that I hoped to get to but did not get to. Why we're using lettuce, why we're using chrein, what's charosis all about, and a number of other things that the time did not allow for this year, and they're on the note board for next year. So hopefully, the making a Seder out of the Seder series will continue to grow. One thing that I did intend to talk about last time, which I forgot about, was about the minhag of pouring out wine, as you say, the 10 makkos, but again, it's going to have to go onto the shelf for the future. And now we are up to the Braisa of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So if you're following along in the copies, it's on page 32 and 32 and 34 in the Hebrew, or 33 and 35 in the English. And here we have the Braisa of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who says that just like the Egyptians, you think they had only 10 makkos in Mitzrayim? Well, I'll tell you even something more exciting. On the sea, there were 50 makkos that plagued them, and he uses the psukim to teach him this. Yep. And then we have further elaboration from Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Akiva that say that each makkah, Rabbi Elazar says that each makkah was comprised of 4, so it's a total really of 400 makkah, 200 makkos on the sea, because 50 times 4. And Rabbi Akiva says each one was comprised of 5, so it's a total of 250 makkos on the sea. In one of the versions of this medrash, as it is found in Medrash Tehillim, the way that the machlokes of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Akiva is formulated is Rabbi Elazar holds that the makkos were tetragon, and Rabbi Akiva holds that it's petragon. So tetragon, obviously we all know the Greek words for 4 and 5, so maybe it would have been more exciting if we had that version of the medrash in our Haggadah, tetragon, petragon. We could say al derech hatzachos. We could say that Rabbi Akiva's opinion is that the Pentagon is attacking Egypt. Anyway, now then we move on to the Dayenu, which is again on page 34 in your Hebrew, page 35 in your English, which we're all familiar with, the song of Dayenu. Now, all of this is not an integral part of the Haggadah. It doesn't appear in the Mishnah Haggadah. It doesn't appear in most of the Haggadahs of the Ga'inim. It doesn't appear in the Haggadah of the Rambam, etc. It's an additional part that's not integral to the Haggadah. However, it's brought, Meister Ekech brings in the name of Rabbi Avraham ben Harambam, that his father did in fact say this. He didn't put it into the Haggadah because it's not integral to the Haggadah, but his father did in fact say it. And like we already brought from the Rambam last time, the more you elaborate on the drashos of the psukim, the better. So this is included in that idea that you do more than the bare minimum. So you finish the bare minimum now. You've done the whole parasha of Aram Yevidavi, but now you're adding this as an additional aspect. Now, an interesting thing is over here that the focus of these 3 paragraphs is Kriyas Yamsuf. It's what happened by Kriyas Yamsuf, which at face value should not be part of the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. The mitzvah of Yetzias Mitzrayim is to say what happened on this night of Pesach. This night was just leaving Egypt. It wasn't Kriyas Yamsuf. Kriyas Yamsuf was a week later. But it seems from here that we're including Kriyas Yamsuf, at least not in the bare minimum of the story, but if you want to expand the story, you could include Kriyas Yamsuf as well. And by the way, in Dayenu, we go even further than Kriyas Yamsuf. In Dayenu, we talk about Kirvanu Lifnei HaSinai, Matan Torah. Now, I want to go back to something we mentioned last time that maybe sheds light a little bit on this. We mentioned the Machlokes Rav Shmuel of Maschel Begnus U'Mesayim B'Shvach. Okay, an effective way to tell a story is that you don't just say the good, you start from the bad. You describe the trouble, you describe how terrible things were, and you really bring out the difficulty, and the challenge, and then you're Mesayim B'Shvach. Then the story is a lot more impactful. You finish off with the good. And we said that Shmuel says that Maschel Begnus U'Mesayim B'Shvach means to start out by talking how we were slaves, and then talk about the redemption from Egypt. And Rav says no, Maschel Begnus means to talk about how our ancestors were idolaters, and now Hashem brought us close to Him. Now, I think that the quote-unquote normal or normative way of looking at this, and this is the way I always looked at it, was that the Machlokes Rav Shmuel is, are we emphasizing more the physical or the spiritual? Are we talking about Avodim Hayinu, we were slaves, or are we talking about the spiritual servitude that we were idolaters and believed in all this pagan stuff until we became close to Hashem? However, it could be that there's something else at play over here. It could be that Shmuel has a more basic, narrow view of things. You have to tell the main story. The main story is we were slaves and we came out. And Rav is saying, no, in order to tell an effective story, and remember, the whole point over here is to tell an effective story. It says in the Pasuk in Parshas Bo, why does Hashem do all these crazy makas and everything? So that you should have a story to tell your children and grandchildren. So the point of all this is to give you a dramatic story. It's important to have a dramatic story because that's how you inculcate and raise the next generation to be passionate and patriotic about it, right? If they don't have a story to tell, the generation of, right, July 4th, right? So the early Americans, they're very patriotic, but now 200 years later, more than 200 years, whatever the dates are, yeah. Do the Americans still feel as patriotic as the early founding fathers who felt so oppressed by the British and they had to break away? So we need to have a story to tell. So Rav says, in order to tell an effective story, you have to zoom out. You can't just say, "Oh, you have to go back all the way to the beginning of the story." Terach. They were idolaters, they were pagans. And then each step along the way, Hashem chose Yitzchak, Hashem chose Yaakov. It could have been Yishmael, it could have been Esav. No, there's a step. We describe all that in the Pesukim. And so, if you're going with the approach of Rav, you have to zoom out and start all the way back from Terach. And you also have to zoom out and go all the way forward till Kriyas Yamsuf, till Har Sinai. We talk about, for example, the 4 expressions of redemption. What's the 4th one? What's velakachti? Velakachti means I will take you to me as a people, which, as the Mefarshim explained, refers to Matan Torah. So Matan Torah isn't just something that happens after the Exodus. The whole story is that I'm taking you out from being Hallelu Avdei Hashem, I'm taking you so that you should no longer be Avdei Paro, you should become Avdei Hashem. Okay, so that's part of the story. And Rav, who's going with this approach that you have to zoom out, is telling you that it's in accordance with Rav, at least in line with the spirit of Rav, that we include Kriyas Yamsuf, Matan Torah, etc. in the story. Now the truth is that in order to make this relevant to the child, it's not good enough to just zoom out from Terach to thing. You have to make it relevant to me, right? And that's perhaps why, as an introduction to Rav's Haggadah is supposed to start, or at least primarily the emphasis is from Etchila Avodah Zarah Yavisenu. What do we say right before that? V'hishamda. What's v'hishamda? This thing that we have troubles, we're telling the child, this is not just something that happened then in Mitzrayim. This is something that happens to us, that throughout all of history, the Klal Yisrael has troubles, and we have, in every generation, and you have to zoom out to see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu Matzilenu Miyadam. And that's all in line with Hagadahs Rav of saying, we got to zoom out. We got to make this a 3-dimensional story. You've got to make this relevant to the here and now, and tell the child that this is relevant to us. This is not just something that happened in the past. This is something that part of our ongoing relationship with Hashem is to recognize that Hashem gives us hardships, gives us troubles, and that is part of our story. That is, in order for us to be successful in continuing the legacy, in continuing the Yiddishkeit, the Torah shouldn't be forgotten. We need to have these challenges, and we need and Hashem to constantly bring us out from them. All right, let's get back to the Haggadah. We have here Machlokes, Rebbe Lezer, Rebbe Kiva, Tetragon, Petragon. I'll mention in Likutei Sichos, in Chelik Tezayin, the Rebbe brings from the Kolbei b'shem Baal HaMalmud. Baal HaMalmud is a bit of a controversial fellow. His name is Rabbi Yaakov Antuli. He is a Jewish philosopher related to the Ibn Tibbun family, who are very much part of the Rambam's Mer Nevuchim and philosophy. And the Baal HaMalmud says that the Machlokes, Rebbe Lezer and Rebbe Kiva, is connected to the 4 Yesodus, the Eish mayim, ruach, afa, fire, water, air, and dust, which are the four elements which were believed to be at the core of the world. And the fifth thing is the chomer hiyuli, which in English is called the quintessential. The word quint is connected to five because it's the fifth thing that's after or in addition to the four yesodos. And based on that, the Rebbe explains how really the Machlokes of Elazar Rabbi Akiva isn't just this number game, but it's about understanding how deeply did the Klippa of Mitzrayim, did the impurity of the Egyptians impact how deeply ingrained in the Jews, in the Egyptians and in the Jews was it, and did it just affect the surface, which is four, or did it even affect the actual core identity, which is the quintessential, the fifth? If you would like to listen to a class on that shir, and Rabbi Yossi Jacobson is your style, you could Google it. There's a very nice class from Rabbi Yossi Jacobson on YouTube about this on this sikha, and we're going to move on now. We're coming here to Dayenu, and I'll just mention one thing briefly. In the Haggadah, we've just finished darshaning the parasha Arami Oivei Davi. Now, there's one other time in the Torah where there was a mitzvah to say Arami Oivei Davi. In fact, that's the context. The context of Arami Oivei Davi, one second. The context of Arami Oivei Davi is in Bikurim, when a person brings his first fruit to the Beis HaMikdash to thank Hashem for the first fruit. It's not on the copies, we'll get to that. When a person brought his first fruit to the Beis HaMikdash to thank Hashem, he had to say the parasha. Also, I think the lashon over there is Doresh, the parasha of Arami Oivei Davi, right? So the context there is giving thanks to Hashem, and you say this whole story of starting from Yaakov Avinu and Lavan all the way down to being given the land to bring produce to Hashem from. Now, there is a lot of overlap between the Haggadah and bringing Bikurim, which we're not going to get to in all the details now, but just at very face value, the fact that you're using the same parasha, the same sukkim, as the basis for what you're talking about. Now, some have suggested that the song Dayenu, I don't mean the song by the tune that we sing, but I'm saying Dayenu is a sort of a poem, a song. The song of Dayenu originally may have been a song that was sung by people who brought Bikurim to the Beis HaMikdash. And it makes sense, because the whole context of the Dayenu is thanking Hashem. The context of the Haggadah is not so much emphasis on thanking Hashem, but the context of Bikurim is thanking Hashem. So it could be that the origins of the Dayenu go as far back as bringing Bikurim into the Beis HaMikdash, and from there it made its way into the Haggadah. And it's interesting to note that it's brought in the Rishonim and it's emphasized by the Arizal, and this is the standard Jewish practice. Of course, the Rabbeim did this, but this is all good Jews do this, that the Haggadah is supposed to be recited b'koil ram u'v'simcha. It's supposed to be recited loud, in a loud, audible voice, and singing it. You're not just supposed to whisper. The Haggadah is it's a story that you're passionate about. You say the Rishonim describe a special tune, that a song that you used to sing with the Manishtana in. It's supposed to be celebratory, it's supposed to be loud, sung, etc. So it could be that that's another connection with Bikurim, which, by the way, the season of Bikurim starts after Pesach. You bring Bikurim between Pesach and Shavuos. So it could be, by Bikurim, you find V'anisa v'amarto, which according to many Mefarshim means it was supposed to be said loud. So it could be that that's another import from the Bikurim that impacts the idea, the nature of the way you say the Haggadah. All right, we're going to move on now to Rabban Gamliel Haya Omer, which is on page 36 in your Hebrew or on page 37 in the English. And here is the famous Rabban Gamliel Haya Omer. Whoever doesn't say these three things on Pesach, Lo Yotza Yudei Chivasai, who's not fulfilled his obligation. What are they? Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Okay, you have to explain, in order to fulfill the pashtus, what this means is, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of recounting the Exodus, you have to connect it to the props that you have on the table. You're telling her a story, you've got your props, you have to explain to your child what these props are. So Pesach, Matzah, Maror, you have to explain it. We already mentioned in the past that according to some, this is actually the answer to the questions of the Manishtana. You have to explain Pesach, Matzah, Maror. Now, the words Rabban Gamliel Haya Omer, Kol Mi Shelo Yom Shleishet Dvar Me'elav Pesach, Lo Yotzi Lichavasei, that's an introduction. Really, if you're talking to your child, all you say is Pesach, da-da-da-dam, Matzah, da-da-da-dam, Maror, da-da-da-dam. We're introducing the introduction. Rabbi Gamliel says, if you don't say this, you're not Yotzei Mitzvah. Why are we putting that introduction in? So, as we mentioned in the past, the framework of the Haggadah is Arvei Psachim, the Mishnah, the last parak of Psachim. So in the Mishnah, it says all the rules. It says, say this paragraph, now do this, now do that. Some of those rules, some of those introductions made it into the text of the Haggadah as we know it. Some of them didn't. So, for example, before Manishtana, the Mishnah tells you, Emein das beben aviv melamdei. In our Haggadahs, we don't say Emein das beben aviv melamdei. We just say Manishtana. But in some, it's going around on WhatsApp. I saw there's a Haggadah, it's called the Haggadah of Afghanistan from the year 700, about 1800 years old. It's considered to be the oldest Haggadah in existence. And in that Haggadah, that line in Das Ben of Melamdoi is there. It's in the text of the Haggadah. So we don't have that text, but we have Rabbi Gamliel HaYomer. It's an introductory line. It doesn't really belong, so to speak, in the recounting, but it made it into the Haggadah. There's other lines like that. You could even say that Lefichach Anachnu Chayavim might be such a line. There are other lines of introduction that made it into the text of the Haggadah. Now, in the Mishnah itself, it just says it very, very, very briefly and very quickly. Pesach, we eat Pesach because Hashem was Pesach al Batei Aviseinu. Matzah because Hashem Shenigalu, and Maror Hashem Shemereru. Right? But we don't just say Pesach, Matzah, Maror in these quick bullet points. We expand on it. We make it into a story, a drasha. So first of all, we ask a question. We say Pesach al Shum al Shum. Right? Why are we eating Pesach? Because Matzah. Why are we eating Matzah? Because we add in a whole question and answer. Right? We try to make this into a live narrative. We're trying to tell the story. There's what makes a good storyteller. There are people out there, and I know Rabbi Hill or other in the Jewish world, in the frum world. They're famous storytellers, and Jewish schools fly them in for events to be the story. What's the difference? I could come in and say the story. If I come in and say the story, what are all the kids going to say? They're going to say, "Oh, I know this story already," right? Because if you're giving them data, I know this story already. If you're a good storyteller, then the kids are excited to hear it again. It's not they're not going to tell you, "Oh, I've heard this story already." So we're trying to make this into an exciting story, right? And then we also add psukim. We don't just say we're eating Pesach because of this, and Matzah because of this, and Maror because of this. For each of the three things, we're giving a pasuk. Shenemar, amartem zavach Pesachu, Shemar, Nemar, Shenemar. Okay. Now I'm gonna. I already alluded. I think most of you were here yesterday in shul. Already alluded to this yesterday. That does the word Pesach even mean Passover? And perhaps if we want to have some sort of clickbaity title to this video, we could say, are you Yoitza the Haggadah if you think that Pesach means Passover? Or something like that. Okay? So there's actually a Geshmaka story locally. Rabbi Weg, who's a shliach in Evanston, he got a phone call from somebody. The whole story, the details is published on Chabad.org, but the upshot of the story was that this guy told him that 30 years ago, he had a sort of a crisis of faith, and there was some sports game that was very important to him, and he was debating whether to participate in the Seder with his family or to go to the sports game. In the end, he went to the sports game, and then he was driving through Oklahoma, and Rabbi Weg's father, who's a sheikh in Oklahoma, had rented a billboard that said, don't pass over or something. And as he's driving back from the sports game on the Greyhound bus, and he passes this sign in the middle of Oklahoma, that changed around his life, and he ended up becoming Baal Tshuva, etc. And 30 years later, Rabbi Weg in Oklahoma hears that this billboard that he put up 30 years ago had such a tremendous impact on somebody's life. I was going to tell him that he got it all wrong because Pesach doesn't mean Passover, but anyway. All right, so there's a lot of discussion about what the word Pesach actually means, and to each of the opinions over here, there are numerous proofs, and it's a very in-depth discussion, but today we're going to have to suffice with just the bullet point entries on this topic. In Parshas Boy, the word Pesach is found 4 times. First of all, in Pasuk Yud Aleph, when it tells you to eat the Korban Pesach in a rush. So, this is something which was unique to Pesach Mitzrayim, that in the year of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Pesach had to be eaten in rush. They had to have Mosnechem Chagurim, their belts tied, which usually the custom was to untie the belt before you eat. So they had to have the belt tied, they had to be wearing their shoes, as if they're about to go out, right? You should eat it in a rush. Pesachul Hashem, it is a Pesach. So Pesach is just the name of the carbon, right? It doesn't yet say what it means, but there does seem to be some association with the fact that it is chipazin, that is a rush. Okay. Then moving on 2 psukim later, Pasuk Chav Gimel, it says the blood will be for you as a sign on the houses. I'll see the blood. Ufasachti aleichem, and I will pasachti. Let's leave that word untranslated for now. Aleichem over you. You won't have any. You won't be smitten in Mitzrayim. Okay, moving 10 psukim later. Hashem will pass over to smite Egypt, and he will see the dam on the mashkef. And Hashem will Pesach, again, I'm not translating that word just yet, over the door. So the first time he was going to be Pasachti on you, now he's Pasachti on the door. And will not allow the mashkes to enter your house. And then finally in Pasuk Chav Zayin, it says, "Va'amartem," you'll tell your children that Zavach Pesach hu Hashem Asher Pasach al Bati Bnei Yisrael, that he was Pasach on the houses of the Jewish people. Okay, so we have the first time it just says the carbon is called a Pesach, and it seems to be associated with eating it in a rush. The second pasuk you have, I will be Pasachti on you. Third pasuk is I'll be Pasach on the door, and the fourth pasuk is I'll be Pasach on the house. Now, in Midrash Chazal and in all the early translations of Chumash, Reb Sadi Gaon, Reb Yoinai Ibn Janach, Menachem ben Sruk. If we want to invoke this as well, we could mention also the Septuagint has it this way, etc., etc. All of them, without exception, translate the word Pesach to mean chemla, compassion, and more specifically, some of them fine-tune it, protection as a result of compassion. I have rachmanis, I have compassion on you, and therefore I protect you. Okay? O fasachti aleichem, I'm going to protect you. O pasach Hashem ala Pesach, Hashem will have compassion over these doors, over these houses. Okay? Now, in the Mechilta, which still goes back to Chazal, there is one shitta that says, Al tikri psicha ela psia. Don't refer to the word as Pesach, which, let's say Pesach means compassion, rather refers to it as Psia. So Ches and Ayin are both letters that come from the throat, Het and Ayin. So those are interchangeable, and Psia means a step. Now, there are, Yasser is making noise. There are a number of proofs that this medrash does not suggesting that the word Pesach means step on a pshat level. It's saying it on a drash level. In other words, I believe that even this shit in the medrash understands that the word Pesach on a pshat level means to have compassion or to protect, but he's saying that in addition, on a drash level, it also means step. Right? Now, what is he gaining from saying it also means step? Okay, we could talk about it, we could suggest ideas. Perhaps there's something, the Midrashim talk about how if there was Egyptian in a Jewish house, or if there was a Jew in an Egyptian house, they were also protected. So it's not just, I'm not just going to protect the Jewish houses. Maybe there's a step over them, maybe has more of that connotation. I'm not sure exactly what step, why the Medrash is saying step. But akapanim, step, the Medrash does suggest, at least on a drash level, that it means step, and step is already a step, no pun intended, right? Step is already a step closer to meaning passing over, right? Rashi is really the first one who really goes strongly with this idea that Pesach means dilug. Dilug means to jump. Okay, now jump over, pass over. Okay, right, there you already see where we're going with this. Now, Rashi does bring that Pesach means to have compassion and to protect, but he seems to be, you have to really compare all the different comments of Rashi and see, but it does seem that as a whole, you could say Rashi is favoring the interpretation that it means to jump. And indeed, post Rashi, we see many Pashtanim who completely ignore the old interpretation and they completely embrace Rashi's Chiddush that it means to jump or pass over. So, for example, Rashbam, who's a grandson of Rashi, Bechar Shor, who's the Rimer Leinish, he's also a French commentator, and Cheskuni, also French. They completely go with the interpretation that it means to jump. Ibn Ezra mentions both. He seems undecisive about it. Right now, this Rashi had a tremendous impact, as we see in these later French commentators, and it even had a tremendous impact on the world at large. Because ask anybody out there, how do you say Pesach in English? Passover. No, Passover, Passover. Where does that start from? So the word Passover was introduced in the 16th century by a Christian scholar by the name of William Tyndale. He's a famous guy. You could Google him. There's on his Wikipedia page that has some other things that he introduced to the world that are famous. I don't recall any examples offhand.
Not Jewish, right?
No, not Jewish. But he basically said, why should we call Pesach Pasch, which is just the Latinization of the Hebrew word? let's call it Passover, which is what the word actually means. And clearly, this Christian Bible scholar was influenced by Rashi and the subsequent French Pashtunim. And I believe that nowadays, pretty much any Haggadah that you open will translate. Let's see over here. Yeah, what does it say? Yeah, for Hashem passed over the houses of the children. But like I've demonstrated, it is the accepted interpretation, but there's certainly a strong history to the other interpretation that Pesach means to have Rachmanis. Now, I'll just mention again, we're not going to go into all the proofs to each of the opinions, it's beyond the scope for right now, but I do want to mention one value that Rashi's interpretation has over the other one. And that is specifically as it pertains to chipazin. Now, even though the actual chipazin, the rush, even though the actual mitzvah of chipazin, to eat the korban Pesach with your belt girdled and your shoes on and your coats on, etc., only applied in Pesach Mitzrayim, but the notion of chipazin transfers is something that we commemorate today as well. In other words, the notion that Yetzias Mitzrayim was done in a rush is something that's very important to commemorate. We're emphasizing and we're honing in that the Jews were really that close. And if they hadn't left Egypt that moment, it may have been too late. And we emphasize that. So, for example, in Parshas Re'eh, Ki b'chipazin yotzasem Mitzrayim is the reason for matzah. Why do you have matzah? Because matzah is the type of bread that has to be baked in a rush, and that manifests this idea of the rush that was an integral component of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Similarly, the Rambam in Gemara Nevuchim in Chele Gimel Perek, I want to say Mem Gimel, explains that that many of the details of the mitzvahs of the Pesach, for example, roasting it, and that many Rishonim say, right, that why do you have to roast the korban Pesach and not cook it? Because roasting is a rushed way to, you just stick it on the fire as it is, rotisserie, a whole goat, a whole lamb, and you put it on the whole sheep, you put it on the fire. It's a much quicker process than having to cook it. So once you say that dilug means to jump, well, jump also connotes speed, right? You jump fast. You're running. It's not so explicit in Rashi, but in some of the later Mefarshim who are accepting Rashi's interpretation spell it out clearly. And that fits very nicely into this first pasuk. It says, this is how you should eat it. Your belts tied, your shoes on your feet, your sticks in hand, and you should eat it in a rush, Pesach Hashem, because it is a Pesach. So it's mashma that the word Pesach itself connotes rush, right? So if you say that Pesach means to jump, well, jumping already includes in its meaning that it means rush, and so that fits in very nicely to the context of Pasuk Yud Aleph. In addition, another whole aspect to the rush, specifically as it pertains to jumping. How do you say, so the Torah says jumping according to Rashi, what word does the Torah use for jumping Pesach? What's another word for jumping? What's the word that Rashi uses for jumping? Dilug. Right? Where else do you have the word diluk? So in Shir HaShirim, it describes Hashem as being medalig al harim. We said this last night in Kiddush Lavana. Medalig, jumping on the mountains. And the Medrash explains that the pasuk of jumping refers specifically that Hashem brought about Geulas Mitzrayim in a rush. Not in a rush, in the rush in the sense that he didn't wait 400 years. Really, it should have been after 400 years, and Hashem did it after 210 years, 190 years early. That Hashem brought the Geula forward 190 years is described by the Medrash as being dilug, as being jumping, right? So that's another aspect in the rush, not just the rush jumping over, but it's not just the rush that we had to leave Mitzrayim that moment because otherwise we would have been too far assimilated into Mitzrayim. The other side of that same coin is the fact that Hashem was doing this kindness to the Harim, which refers to the forefathers, that He brought us out of Mitzrayim after 210 years and didn't make us wait the full 400 years. Okay. Now, when it comes to Pesach, the Korban Pesach, we emphasize we don't certainly in Chabad practice we don't point to the bone on the Seder plate because we don't want to give any impression that the bone itself is the Korban Pesach. We want to stay away from any implication of bringing a korban outside the Beis Hamikdash. So we say Pesach that our ancestors used to eat in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, when it comes to matzah and morer, what it says in the Haggadah, what it says in the Seder, what it says in the Gemara, what it says in Shulchan Aruch, what it says in all the Paskim, is that you're supposed to pick it up. You pick up the matzah and you say matzah zu shana ichlem al shumma. You pick up the morer and you say morer zu shana ichlem al shumma. in the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, K'sheyagia min l'matzah zu shana oichlin, tzarech l'hagbiya hamatzah, you have to lift up the matzah, l'har'oisa lahamasubin, to show it to those assembled, she'techabib hamitzvah aleim, to make the mitzvah cherished by them. Now, there's one other time in the Haggadah where it says that you're supposed to lift up the matzah, and that is by Helach Ma'anya, right? It says in the Haggadah to lift up the matzah. Now, both by Helach Ma'anya, we said the Chabad practice is we don't lift up the matzah, we just uncover it. Here too, the Chabad practice is that we do not lift up the matzah, we do not lift up the maror, rather we just point at it. And I don't know the reason for this Chabad custom, that again is a divergence from Gemara, Shulchan Aruch, and everything. Now, in the Rebbe's Haggadah, by Helach Ma'anya, he does not address this question. Over here, he does subtly address the question, and he tells you, look in Machzah Vitri. In Machzah Vitri, it says, Machzah Vitri says, when you come to Matzah Zu Marazu, you place your hand on them. Okay? So, the Rebbe seems to be suggesting that Machzah Vitri serves as a precedent to the Chabad custom. However, I have two problems with this. Number one, you haven't really answered the question. You just said, okay, so it's not just the Chabad custom, it's Machzah Vitri. But the problem is still a problem. Why is the Machzah Vitri telling you to do something differently? The Machzah Vitri is from the school of Rashi. Why is the Machzah Vitri telling you to do something different than the Gemara, etc.? The Gemara says to live it. Why is the Machzah Vitri saying? Not only that, the Machzah Vitri talks about this in two places. And in the other place, he says clearly, you lift up the matzah, you hold the matzah in your hand, you raise it up, you wave it up and back, and you say matzah zu, right? So the Machzah Vitri is, in one place he just says put your hand on it, but in another place he spells it out. You're supposed to lift it up and wave it and make a whole show of the matzah to get everybody riled up about the matzah. So why is the Chabad custom not to do so? Now, I don't have a good answer, I don't know, but it's a question that I think is an important question to me. It's a question that's what's going on over here. I want to suggest something, not definitive, but a suggestion. There's a minhag that's brought in Rishonim. Machzah Vitri also brings it, and Machzah Vitri says it's not a good minhag, right? What's that minhag? The minhag is that when it comes to, let's say, by Helach Ma'anya, where you lift up the matzah to say Helach Ma'anya, before you do that, you should take the egg and the bone off the plate. Why should you take the egg and the bone off the plate? Because you don't want to lift up the egg and the bone and say this is the carbon. Anything, again, you don't want to do anything that gives the implication that you're considering the Shnei Tavshilim as actually being the carbon. Yes, they are there to commemorate the carbon, but they're not an actual carbon. So therefore, there was a minhag to not lift them up. Before you lift up the Seder plate, remove them from the Seder plate. Now the Machzah Vitri says there's no need, obviously it's not a carbon, there's no need to do that. But it wouldn't be the first time that Chabad do a custom that it says in the Paskim that there's no need to do the custom. Just another example related to Pesach is, it's brought, the Alter Rebbe brings in Shulchan Aruch, there's a custom not to eat on Erev Pesach apples and pears and nuts and other ingredients that go into the chareses. And the Alter Rebbe says, I think he even almost, it's a foolish, or there's some expression is like, don't pay attention to this custom. And yet, that is the Chabad custom. So, the fact that there are customs out there that Chabad do, even though the Paskim say you don't need to do them, but at least you see that such a custom used to exist. And so perhaps the reason why Chabad never pick up the Kaira is we know already that Chabad have a very extreme approach to this whole idea of anything looking like a carbon. For example, the Chabad minhag is, we mentioned in the past, that you remove most of the meat from the bone. Why are you removing most of the meat from the bone? Because you want a tiny bit of meat just to be out to the mitzvah of having a cooked dish on your Seder plate, but we don't want it to give this is roasted, this could lead to dancing, this could lead to thinking you have a carbon bachutz. So it could be that the Chabad approach is like, we're so extreme against anything that may give the impression of a carbon nowadays, so we don't ever lift up the kaira in case you might lift up the kaira with the bone on it, and if you would do that, it might give that impression. Again, it's a suggestion, take it or leave it, and it also leaves another fundamental question, why? Like, why are we making such a big deal about this achilus kachim bachutz? Like if you tell me something is avodah zarah, so I understand, like something like avodah zarah, you want to stay a million miles away from, right? But why are we staying a million miles away from the idea of bringing a carbon bizman hazeh? Okay, but for now we'll leave it at that, unless anybody else has something genius to suggest.
I might have something genius to suggest.
Go on.
I think that the Rambam might find that to be very compelling to do it like that.
Meaning, because the Rambam would hold that Kodshim B'chutz is in the genre of Avodah Zarah.
They're trying to avoid Avodah Zarah.
Yeah, okay, that could be.
I don't know how brilliant that was.
All right. B'chol doiv doir. We're now towards the bottom of page 36 or 37 in the English. B'chol doiv doir, in every generation, you have to see yourself as if you went out of Egypt. Again, that's another introduction that kind of doesn't really belong in the narrative, but we're saying the instructions. We're saying the instructions too. We're reading the instructions. By the way, it's interesting that the Rebbe's minhag was that he would read all the instructions from the Haggadah, like Noitel Hamar, the Rebbe would read all of that. I don't know if loud or quiet or in his just with his eyes, but like we're reciting the instructions. The instruction is that you have to see yourself as if you went out from Egypt, and we're going to say Afisanu Ga'alimoim. Now this idea that it's as if we ourselves, not just our ancestors, but we ourselves were redeemed from Egypt. We've already said in Avodim Hayinu, but we're repeating it now, and the reason we're repeating it now is because we're trying to juxtapose it to Hallel. Right? What do we say by Hallel? Look at the bottom of page 36 or 37, right? Not just our ancestors were redeemed from Egypt, even we ourselves were redeemed from Egypt. And then the next paragraph starts us with the fichach. Therefore, what does therefore mean? Therefore, because it's not just our ancestors, it's also us, therefore we ourselves have the obligation to thank Hashem and to recite Hallel, and we give this line. Therefore, we're going to praise, and we use all these different synonyms to mean praising and thanking, Lahallel, L'Shabeach, L'Foy, L'Reimim, L'Hadel, L'Varech, L'Hallel, L'Kalis, etc., to Hashem who did us all these miracles. And then the last line of this paragraph, again, now we're on the top of 38, or if you're following in English, the top of 39, V'noim alafanav Hallelujah. What does V'noim alafanav Hallelujah mean? We will say to him, Hallel. Right? In some versions of the Haggadah, it doesn't even have that last word, Hallelujah. It just says, V'noim alafanav, colon, Hallelujah, Hallelujah Abdi Hashem. Like that leads straight into Hallel. By the way, it's in our Haggadah, it does actually say the word Hallel. Now, there is a mitzvah to say Hallel on the Seder night. This mitzvah is already explicit in the Pasuk in the book of Yeshaya, chapter 30, verse 29. It says, Hashir yiyolachem kilel hiskadesh chag. We say Hallel on the night of Pesach. Now, we say the Hallel over a cup of wine, like we say many important things over a cup of wine. And according to Beis Hillel, which is obviously the way we practice it, we say until after B'tzeis Yisrael and Mitzrayim. At this point, we say the rest of Hallel over the fourth cup. Why are we saying B'tzeis Yisrael? Well, B'tzeis Yisrael and Mitzrayim is talking about the Exodus, so that pertains to this part of the Seder as well. Now, in B'tzeis Yisrael, we already mentioned Kriyas Yamsuf, Malacha Yom Kisanos, and we also mentioned Matan Torah, Haharim Turkut Che'elim, right? Let's see that in the English. What is with you, O sea, that you flee? That's referring to Kriyas Yamsuf. And the next pasuk, mountains, why do you skip like rams? That's referring to the giving of the Torah. So because it occurred to me that perhaps that's another reason why we're including Dayenu, which goes as far as Kriyas Yamsuf and Matan Torah, because once we're saying B'tzeis Yisrael, that invokes those ideas, so we already include that in the Haggadah as well. Now, there is a machloikus if we're supposed to say Hallel, a bracha over Hallel on the Seder night, like every time we say Hallel in Shul, you say Asher Kedushanim Mitzvah V'Tzivan L'Krias Hallel. Here we don't say that bracha. Why not? So there's different shittas, but the way the Chabad practice is based on is that really we pass on that you do need to have a bracha on Hallel, and the only reason you don't say the bracha is because you're splitting it into two, because you're saying half of Hallel now, and the rest of not half, 2 paragraphs now, and the rest later, and in the middle you're interrupting with your meal and your matzah and your maror, so you can't make a bracha over Hallel that you interrupt with in the middle. But in order to make sure that we say Hallel with a bracha anyway, we say it in Shul. So that's one of the reasons why our minhag is to say Hallel in Shul after Ma'ariv, before we go home to the Seder, is to give us the opportunity of saying Hallel on the night of Pesach, Hashir yiyolachem kilel hiskadesh chag, with the bracha. You can't say a bracha by the Seder. Really, you're supposed to say Hallel standing up, but by the Seder, because we're doing everything in a way of nobility, so cherus, so we don't make you stand up, you could say the Hallel, no, you could, the minute we're supposed to say Hallel on the Seder night sitting, but it's brought in Shulchan Aruch, you should say it in a, sitting upright, be'ema, not slouching or not even reclining, etc. It should be done in that way. Now, okay, we're on to the final thought for today's class. In the final bracha of the Haggadah that we say over the cup of wine, so now we're looking at the bottom of page 38, and the top of page 40 in the Hebrew, or if you're in the English, it's the bottom of 39 and the top of 41. Okay? So this is the bracha. This is the bracha. Asher galadom v'galas v'sedim mitzrayim. And then we say, Kein Hashem elokeinu v'lekei v'seinu. So Hashem yagienu l'moedim v'legalim acherim should bring us to help us reach other holidays, other Yomim Tovim. Habayim l'kasenu, which are coming to greet us l'shalom in peace. Meichem b'vinyan yirecha, we should be rejoicing with the building of your city. V'sasim aveidasecha, and rejoicing with the service in the Beis Hamikdash. V'noichal sham, and we will eat them in hazvachim from the zvachim, from the sacrifices. Min hapsachim, and from the carbon pesachs. Asher yagia adamim al mizbeach chalarotzim, whose blood will be on your mizbeach, etc. Baruch atah Hashem Goal Yisrael. Okay. Now, then there's a parenthesis. The parenthesis says that if it's Saturday night, if it's Matzah Shabbos, we should switch around the order, and we should say not that we will eat over there from the Zevach and the Pesach, from the Karbonis, which is general for carbon, and also from the carbon Pesach, but we should first say we're going to eat from the Pesach, and then we're going to eat from the Zevach. So what's going on over here? All right, so let's back up a second. In the Nusach HaHaggadah, the way it's in the Mishnayos, the way it is in the Gemara, the way it is in the Bavli, the way it is in the Yerushalmi, and even the way it is in the Hagadahs of the Goinim and various Hagadahs that were found in the Geniza. Yesh. Some Hagadahs say ben Apsachim ben Hazvachim, some say ben Hazvachim ben Apsachim, and you get the impression that it doesn't matter. Whatever, you're going to eat there from we say generally from Karbanis, we'll eat Karbanis, and specifically, obviously, it's Pesach, so we specifically mention the carbon Pesach. Some say it this way, some say it that way. There doesn't seem to be any particularity about the order that you say it in, and certainly there's no reference that in regular year you would say it one way, and when it's Matzah Shabbos, as the first Seder is this year, you would say it another way. Now, move on to the next generation, to the generation of the Rishonim, generations of the Rishonim. Now we already find some Rishonim saying, no, you're specifically supposed to first say min hazvachim and then min hapsachim, and others saying, no, you're specifically supposed to say first min hapsachim and then min hazvachim. So let's go through some of the reasons. Okay, first of all, we already mentioned that on Erev Pesach, there's two karbanos. You bring a carbon Pesach, and you also bring another carbon which is called Chagigas Yudalet, a Chagiga of the 14th. And you're supposed to eat first the carbon Pesach. First you eat the Chagiga of Yudalet. First you eat the other carbon, the Chagiga, Zevach and Chagiga. We're going to use those words interchangeably. So first you eat the Zevach or the Chagiga, and then you eat the carbon Pesach. Why? Because the carbon Pesach is supposed to be eaten al hasoiva. Why is the carbon Pesach supposed to be eaten al hasoiva? So there's two reasons. The main reason is that the carbon Pesach you eat like royalty. A royal, you don't eat because you're starving. You eat because you can, right? So you make sure you've already taken care of your hunger by eating the carbon chagiga, and now you're not hungry. Now I'm eating the carbon pesach. Oh, it's just a treat. It's a geschmack, a piece of roasted meat. It's a treat. I'm eating it not because I have to, but because I can. Okay, so that's one reason why the carbon pesach is supposed to be eaten al hasayva. Another reason is because there is a mitzvah to eat. There's a prohibition to break bones in the carbon pesach. Not allowed to break any bones. And if you're very hungry, you might, in your haste, break a bone to chew out the juice of the bone. So we can make sure that first you eat the carbon chagiga, so you're not so hungry, and then you eat the carbon pesach. Now, so Tosha says that because you're supposed to eat the carbon chagiga before you eat the carbon pesach, so therefore you say v'noichal sham. What are we going to eat? Min hazvachim, first from the zvachim, which is the carbon chagiga, and then min hapsachim. So you have to say min hazvachim first. Another reason, an entirely different reason to say min hazvachim first, is brought in the Shabbat Leket in the name of his brother Reb Binyamin. Now, we mentioned in the first class that the Shabbat Leket often quotes his brother Reb Binyamin, so here you go, he's done it again. Reb Binyamin says that actually, we're not talking about next Pesach, we're talking about Mashiach's going to come and we're going to bring korbanos. We're talking here about Sukkos. Next Sukkos we're going to eat from the Zvachim, and then afterwards, the following Pesach, we're going to eat from Min HaPsachim. So he says you have to do Zvachim Pesachim first, not because on Pesach first you eat the Chagiga and then the Dal. It says Min HaZvachim means Sukkos, and Min HaPsachim means Pesach. And over there the context is, when is Mashiach going to come? the brother, the Rabbi Yamin, the brother of Rabbi Tzidkiah, the Shabbat Leket, he goes with the opinion that Mashiach comes in the month of Tishrei. So Mela, we're saying now we hope Mashiach is going to come next Tishrei. So in Sukkot we should be able to eat the karbanos. In the Pirush of the Rid, actually also Italian, and of the Haggadah, he says that we're talking about Shavuos. He has this opinion that Mashiach, the Geula starts on Pesach, but it finishes by Shavuos or something along those lines. And so V'noichel Sham Min Hazvachim refers to Shavuos and also to Sukkot, and then Min Hapsachim, and then we're going to have next year from the Korban Pesach. However, in other Rishonim, they say no, you have to first say Min Hapsachim and then Min Hazvachim. Why? So, first of all, you have Rabbi Eliyahu Mikorbil. Rabbi Eliyahu Mikorbil is the son of Rabbeinu Peretz, Rabbeinu Peretz of Korbil. Korbil is a French city just about 40 kilometers south of Paris, so in the region of Paris. And Rabbi Eliyahu Mikorbil says, no, you have to say Min Hapsachim first, because at the end of the day, the primary carbon for the Pesach night is the Korban Pesach. The Chagiga is additional. And so you start by mentioning what's primary, and then you say, so the first Min Hapsachim, and then Min Hazvachim. Another thing, maybe similar, is the Maharil. The Maharil says, look, when Erev Pesach falls on Shabbos, as it does this year, you don't bring a Korban Chagiga, you only bring a Korban Pesach. So that further emphasizes how the Korban Pesach is primary, and because the Korban Pesach is primary, and it's every year, whereas the Korban Chagiga is only in a year where it doesn't fall on Shabbos, so therefore you should first say Min Hapsachim and then Min Hazvachim. Now again, here's a very interesting reason. Rabbeinu Yoina, Talmidei Rabbeinu Yoina, and also in another Haggadah from the Talmud Harash, they say a very interesting thing. They say, why does the Chagiga come before the Korban? Well, let's say the other way around. They say, now in the time of the Bayis Rishon and the Bayis Sheni, first they ate the Korban Chagiga, and then they ate the Korban Pesach. But when Mashiach comes, are we still going to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim? When Mashiach comes, Mashiach is a much bigger deal than Yetzias Mitzrayim. Right? Now we see even in the Haggadah Gufa, we have the mission of Rabbi the Chachamim Meimrim Kolim Echiach Elavim L'Moisei Mashiach. In other words, it's not obvious that when Mashiach comes, you still have to talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim. It could be Mashiach is a new thing. We could scratch Yetzias Mitzrayim. We just focus on Mashiach. But Chachamim say no. Even when Mashiach comes, we're still going to talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim. But the Rishonim explain that when Mashiach comes, Yetzias Mitzrayim is going to be secondary, but the real headline is going to be Mashiach, and this is alluded to already in the pasuk where it says in I think it's in Yirmiyah. You no longer will say Chai Hashem who took the people out of Egypt. Rather, you'll say Ki Chai Hashem Asher Helav Asher Hevi Azera Beis Yisrael Me'eretz Sofeinu Mikol Ha'arot Asher Hidachtem Sham Yashval Ad Masa. Right. So already in the Navi you have this idea that when there's a bigger Geula than Yetzias Mitzrayim becomes secondary, and therefore says Rabbeinu Yoina and others that when Mashiach comes, we are now in the time of the Bayis Sheni, they first ate the Korban Chagiga and then they ate the Korban Pesach. But when Mashiach comes, the Iker celebration is going to be over the Korban Chagiga, which is going to represent Mashiach, and the Korban Pesach is going to be secondary. So we're talking here about what's going to be when Mashiach comes. When Mashiach comes, first we're going to eat Min Hazvachim, and then we're going to eat Min Hazvachim. Because then the Pesach is going to be secondary, so we'll get that out of the way first. And the Zevach is going to be Nechal al HaSoiva. The Zevach is going to be the one that we want to eat when we're already full, and we're showing that we're just eating it because we can, not because we need to. Now, until now we've seen various reasons of the Rishonim. Should you say Min Hapsachim Min Hazvachim? Should you say Min Hazvachim Min Hapsachim? None of the Rishonim so far have said that there's any difference what day of the week it is this year. Some of the Rishonim say you always say Min Hapsachim Min Hazvachim. Others say you always say Min Hazvachim Min Hapsachim. However, Maharil, who's actually a Talmud of the Maharil, he says, it depends. Now again, if you recall, the Maharil is the one who said that the reason why you first say Min Hazvachim and then Min Hazvachim is because Pesach is primary. Why is Pesach primary, said the Maharil? Because some years you don't have a Zevach if it falls on Shabbos. So perhaps Maharil is taking the same logic, the same svara of his teacher, but he's fine-tuning it a bit and says, no, that depends. In a regular year where you have a Chagiga and a Pesach, so then what do you eat first? You eat the Chagiga first so that the Pesach should be eaten when you're already full. So then you say Min Hazvachim and then Min Hapsachim. But on a year like this year, where the first Seder falls on Matzah Shabbos, so then in that year the Taka wouldn't be any Korban Chagiga, and therefore you first say Min Hapsachim and then you add, you don't want to entirely remove Min Hazvachim, so you still have it there, but you have it a secondary. And the Bach, by the way, adds on to the Maharil that the same would be on the second Seder night, which if Pesach falls This year Pesach falls on Matzah Shabbos, but if Pesach falls on Shabbos, so then the second Seder night is on Matzah Shabbos, so then you would also say Min HaPsachim and Min HaZvachim first. Now, this opinion of the Maharival is brought lahalacha in many poskim. The Taz brings it, the Magen Avraham brings it, and the Alter Rebbe and the Shulchan Aruch brings those both opinions. Doesn't come down one way or the other, but in the Haggadah, in the Seder, the Alter Rebbe does say to do it this way, and that's our minhag, and that I believe is the most common minhag that has been widely accepted, that you switch, that in a regular year you say Min HaZvachim and Min HaPsachim, and when the Seder falls on Matzah Shabbos, you first say Min HaPsachim and then Min HaZvachim, as we will this year. I'll just finish off with this, one question that I always had on this. I said, you're talking here about next year. You're saying that now I'm sitting on the Seder night and I'm davening that next year I should be able to Nechel Min HaZvachim and HaPsachim. So if you're going to switch around the order based on what day of the week it is, it should depend on next year. You should say, if next year's Seder night is going to be a Matzah Shabbos, then I should say Min HaPsachim and Min HaZvachim. What does it depend on this year? Now, so this year I saw that actually this question has already been asked by the Knesset Yechezkel. Knesset Yechezkel is Rabbi Chetzel Katzenellenbogen, who was the Rav of Altona and Hamburg, and he was a contemporary of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Really, Rabbi Yaakov Emden lived in Altona. He was not the Rav. He was a very important and controversial character and had an interesting relationship with Rabbi Chazkel Katzenellenbogen. But Rabbi Chazkel Katzenellenbogen is the Rav at the time of the Rabbi Yaakov Emden, and in his Shuvas Knesset Yechezkel, he says, I don't understand, what's Maharival saying? It should depend on next year. And then he goes as far as to suggest that that's what Maharival actually meant. Maharival has a psaloshin, K'shayovei Pesach L'Matzah Shabbos. He says K'shayovei means when it's going to come next year on Matzah Shabbos. But the Knesset Yechezkel himself says no, like at the end of the day, you can't know what's going to be next year, because if Mashiach comes, we're going to abandon the fixed calendar and introduce Kiddush HaChodesh Al Pi HaRe'iyah, sanctifying the new month based on witnesses testifying the sighting of the new moon. And so maybe just because the fixed calendar says that next year Shabbos is going to be Pesach is going to be Matzah Shabbos, maybe that will change. And so the Knesset Yechezkel prefers the idea that you never change, that you always say it the same way, Min HaZvachim and Min HaPsachim. But nevertheless, we follow the Alter Rebbe and the majority of poskim who do accept this chiddush of Maharival, that we switch it around, and on a year of Matzah Shabbos we first say Min HaPsachim and then we say Min HaZvachim. Huh? No.
We have the dates remembering this.
Oh, so Mendel's asking a very good question. Why in such a year? I think we mentioned this in the first class. Tosfos asked a question. In such a year like that now, when Pesach falls on Shabbos, we shouldn't have an egg on the Seder plate, right? Because there is no Korban Chagiga this year. But Tosfos says, nevertheless, we do have it.